So I recently watched The Covenant, which is released in cinemas across the UAE. It is the story about the relationship between two people. So this rugged, reflexive American sergeant and this quietly fierce Afghan interpreter. And it's really these two people are tied together by a kind of unspoken, tacit contract. Now, a story about America's involvement, and this is primarily why I want to talk to you about this film. A story about America's involvement in Afghanistan can go wrong for a number of reasons, and we know that we've seen enough such stories. Yet, I found The Covenant to be different. It was a lot less somehow focused on let's demonize Muslims, let's stereotype Muslims. Like, it wasn't obsessed with that. Rather, it seemed to be like this really poignant exploration of the sergeant, of the relationship between the sergeant, the translator, and the more macro level forces at play, the political milieu, the state's involvement. And as someone who studied anthropology, whose interest lies in the social sciences, I found it to be this classic illustration of when the personal meets the political. And really, I think one of the strongest treatments of the film is that it anchors this very important, significant, moving story in this single narrative between the translator and the interpreter to make a much larger point. So it's not just about, oh, what are states doing, what are organizations doing. It's not just about that high level kind of interaction, but rather how has this impacted people's lives in this much more intimate, much more personal way. I think that's something that seeps through at every point of the story. Now, of course, this idea, this notion of the US rescuing, airlifting people, offering them a passport to get them out of Afghanistan might invoke the savior syndrome for some people, because far too often we've heard this narrative of the West saving the rest of us. Yet, in all honesty, I did not find the Covenant kind of playing to that gallery or trying to, make large statements about villains and heroes. What I really love about the film is that it, in fact, really problematizes, it really complicates this whole notion of villains, heroes, binaries. It's sort of beyond that, and that's where I think I keep coming back to the personal aspect of the story. It doesn't harp on who's emerging as the savior, who's emerging as the savage in a sense. The acting is super. The exchanges that take place between the two protagonists, whether they are the stretched kind of poetic silences or whether they are the more heated, charged, active action sequences, both of those, feel raw, they feel authentic. There's almost this telepathy between these two individuals, which is, I don't know, it's very tender and it really reaffirms, I think, one's faith in a world filled with coexistence. It reaffirms your faith in humanity in a sense, which we don't see often enough. And again, it's not done in some largely moralistic, didactic kind of way, which is also fresh. The film also offers a brief glimpse into what life is like for people who get left back home, who are kind of in waiting, in this limbo stage where someone from the family is gone to another country to fight. But that said, I think that storyline requires a complete branching out and offshoot of its own. There is so much meat on the bone to unpack there, just to see, what is that trauma and trial like. But perhaps let me end by saying one of the biggest accomplishments of The Covenant is that it's talked about a subject matter which has to do with physical combat, with fighting. And whilst we find that in the film is about much more than its action sequences. There are many other types of conflict and battles that are going on, be that between people's personal relationships, between the officers at base, or in some moments also within one's own mind, kind of more introspectively, more reflexively. So overall, it is this meditative, this really observant, I would say, mindful exploration of what happens what kind of less spoken, less visible fallout happens when one nation mingles in the affairs of another without perhaps being fully cognizant or, considering what the collateral damage might be beyond the bombs, beyond the statistics, which are obviously very important to also consider. But what happens kind of behind the scenes in people's individual personal lives on the ground? And again, we have seen so much on this subject matter that I wouldn't have expected to find something that doesn't feel like it's dragging its feet, that isn't trying to that isn't tired and trying to tell a story which we've heard, seen, watched a lot of times. So I would definitely recommend checking out The Covenant, ideally at a cinema if it's released where you stay. I really think it's bringing something differentiated to the conversation.